ladies and gentlemen, are placebo slop or not? This video goes out to Niall. Today we're going to figure that out by going over, first, what is slop? 2, how to detect it. 3, how much of their catalog is slop or otherwise. 4th, if they're talented regardless. And then finally, if you are going to think they're slop or not and why. Now, without further ado, here's the music matrix. If you don't know already, from 0 to 11, we have energy and or intensity. And on the bottom, we have from 0 to 10, catchiness and or how memorable or iconic a song is, right? Now, if a song is less than a 7 in terms of catchiness, it is called slop. Maybe you as a person go, well, actually, it's technically this. But to most people, if a song is not sufficiently good in terms of catchiness, then they just say it's bad, right? Now, if it is good and it's on the lower intensity energy level, it gets called pop music. When it's on the higher intensity, it gets called rock music, right? And so when things go across this line, the slop line, the 7, in terms of catchiness, 7 out of 10, when things go above that line, they then add the word. So you could call this person an indie artist, but then the song is really catchy, it gets called indie pop. You could call them a punk band. Green Day's not catchy songs you might call punk. When they write a catchy song, people might call it punk rock. There you go, Metallica. It might be called metal, but then if it's really catchy, it also gets called rock, right? The average person will. So now we know what that is. Less than a 7 in terms of catchiness is slop. We're talking about placebo. How do we detect? 2, how do we detect slop when it occurs, when it's present? You know, that's a big problem for people. How do I detect it? The biggest bang for the buck is going to be predictability. If someone's completely corny like Joe Bonamassa, it's guaranteed to be slop. If something's completely incoherent like most of the Mars Volta, except for a couple songs, it's also going to be guaranteed to be slop. But if something's in between being balanced like Back in Black by AC/DC or being zany like Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, it still has a chance of being slop. It also has a chance of being, something that's just for fans of that genre or fans of that style or that band. But now it also has a chance of being hit quality music, not being slop. Objectively, everyone agrees this is good, right? So that's where we want to get, right? And so if something's completely outside of this, if it's in the quirky zone or the formulaic zone in terms of predictability, if it's to the right or the left in terms of predictability of that money zone, we know it's going to be slop no matter what. We know it's not going to be more than a 7, right? So that's basically like, how do we detect slop? Well, we can detect pretty clearly, if it's outside these bounds. Now, within these bounds is where we get the interesting part, right? In the money zone, when something could be, couldn't be, yada, 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 now we go to the catalog audit, right? The catalog audit, we look at how much of Placebo's catalog is slop or otherwise, right? So basically, this is where we look at a distribution. It's just the ratios. It's not the total amount, right? You can kind of see here, like, this is an OnlyFans model. OnlyFans model. Basically, that's where we're looking at the quality in terms of catchiness and songwriting versus how much of those songs relative to the other quality songs there are in the catalog overall, right? So an OnlyFans model is pretty clear where there's very little hit music that's completely objectively non-slop, and there's also very little objectively slop. Even fans think it's slop. Most of it ends up in the middle here where the fans, they say it's not slop, but the average person would call it slop. So that's where you get people like Frank Zappa, Motorhead, Slayer. I like Frank Zappa and I love Motorhead, but anyone who's not a fan of their style or of that genre of music, they're just going to say it's bad, or they're going to skip the songs that pop on the radio. If it popped on the radio or a Spotify playlist, most people would skip it unless they're a fan. But if you're a fan, you're not skipping any of the music, right? That can happen for any band if someone's a super fan, sure. But for just the average listener to that genre or style, that's where you see an OnlyFans distribution. Distribution. For example, a hit or quit, we can look at someone like Queen or Weezer, where the music is either everyone's going to listen to it, no one's skipping it, or everyone's skipping it, right? This is very polarizing. It's either great or horrible. There's no in between. Now, something different to that is something like, let's say, a 50-50 distribution that you might see from Nine Inch Nails or Led Zeppelin. Think 3 albums that are just like, these are undeniable. 3 albums worth, maybe it's, 36 songs, from here and there. Most of it's from 3 main albums. Then you take out a couple, B-sides or fans-only type of songs, and you take the hits from the other albums, and together it adds up to 3 albums worth of hits, right? That just everyone thinks is good. maybe 3 albums worth of stuff that fans go, man, this is great, but I get most people are going to skip it if they're not a fan of the band or the genre. Then 3 albums worth of just garbage. Everyone's skipping it. No one likes it, right? So that's a 50-50 distribution. Anything less than that is a less than 50-50. Anything more than that is a classic catalog. This is where you typically want to be if you want low controversy. Meaning that, when I said at the very beginning, if you are going to think Placebo are bad or if you're going to think they're good, that depends, right? Basically, here's the thing. If Placebo has a mostly good catalog, right, then the only reason someone would say they're bad is because they just don't like the style. That's the reason. It's not the quality of the songwriting or that, they don't consistently write good music. And so as it happens with Placebo, they do write good music consistently. They do have a classic catalog, right? If you go across the albums, it's all either in the hit range or the B-side range. There's very little stuff that's like completely skippable. There's very little stuff where you're like, this is garbage. There's not a lot of it, right? That's a good place to be. I would say someone who doesn't have that is David Bowie. David Bowie is great, very talented. Who did I say was like David Bowie? There's someone I came up with who has a very similar phenomenon where they know, Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne, maybe not his records, but him as an individual. This is kind of different, kind of off topic, not very far, but you'll see how this all ties in. Ozzy Osbourne and David Bowie figured out how to scout really good talent and put them together, right? But Ozzy was able to end up more on this side or this side of the equation, and David Bowie ended up here, because what would happen is Ozzy would pick really good songwriters, and so would David, and then David would just make a bunch of music with them, and then do that again with a new group of people, and a new group of people, and a new group of people. But David Bowie didn't care if he had 2 really good songs on an album, and then the rest is unlistenable, right? Or if he had a whole decade's worth of unlistenable albums, right? And so that's what you saw with David Bowie that would weigh down his average, versus Ozzy would still at least filter by quality, right? Though he put together a new group of musicians. The only reason I compare them to those two is their singing style is distinct, but they're not musical geniuses. They're not particularly talented as musicians, but they're very inspirational, and they know to put themselves together with people who are also very talented, who can complement the things that they are not masters at, right? This is in contrast to someone, let's say Geddy Lee, who's incredible at the bass, who can write really good songs, and is an incredible singer, and is a very distinct singer. Not only is he distinct and incredible, and can write good songs, like, that's something you don't often see, right? Les Claypool's really good musician, really distinct voice, and you could argue that he's a really good songwriter. I would say he's probably a moderate to good songwriter, but we don't really see him trying to write good, like really catchy music all the time. But the catalog does not bear that out as much as someone like Ozzy or like Geddy Lee, right? I guess Geddy Lee Rush has a lot of music that is skippable, but I like Rush, and this is the thing too. This is not a condemnation, but Placebo, they don't end up there. They actually end up here, where it's pretty hard to argue. See, Placebo, when I was going through, quick aside, I'll flip to the talent portion and I'll tell you, because this is where we get into it. There's a lot of stuff there, and this is going to become important. We have brand right here. This is the 4th thing. So now that we know what is slop, less than a 7 in terms of catchiness, right? We know how to detect it. It's basically the predictability. If something's not in the money zone, it's likely that it's guaranteed to be slop, and then we know they have a good catalog. Most of their catalog is not slop. Now we're going to look at, are they talented regardless, right? Because this is where we get to, we have the songwriting, right? I would give them a green. I went through their top 10 songs, I went through a lot of their music, and I picked the top 10 songs that I liked the best, and even out of them, the amount of music they have that is above an 8 catchy or above a 7 catchy out of 10 is astonishing. They have a lot of good music, but this is where we get into something, right? So their musicianship and their skill, this is not really just about can they play the instrument. This is more, when people hear this, does it inspire them to write music and say, wow, I want to do things in that style, right? They were able to blend things. When I was listening, I was hearing things that kind of sounded like Smashing Pumpkins, The Killers. I heard stuff that was, there's a band called The Thermals. I think they're from, I want to say they're from the northwestern United States, The Thermals, and also Death Cab for Cutie. So there's vocal stuff like Death Cab for Cutie kind of up there. There's that a friend in need, a friend with weeds, a friend in need, a friend with weeds, much better, right? I will possess. I gotta spend some time, love. You gotta spend some time with me. It's up there, and then hardly art, hardly garbage, hardly art. The thermals. It's up in that range. But then the songwriting and the composition, you would see lots of elements indicative of what the Killers would later go on to do, or just a better distillation of what the Smashing Pumpkins were doing a little bit prior and a little bit during the reign of Placebo in the kind of mid to late 90s and then early 2000s. So it seems pretty clear to me, and this whole thing, does it inspire people to play the instrument or write songs that way? To me, it very clearly would say, like, okay, Death Cab for Cutie, which I don't think got started until maybe a couple of years after, or they didn't really start kicking. I don't think their first album is until like the end of the 90s, right? Early 2000s. Maybe that was some EPs. But Placebo predates Death Cab for Cutie by probably I think first Placebo record, I want to say 92, maybe it's 94, but something in there, right? And they're very clearly mixing some of these Smashing Pumpkins, more droning elements that are very floral and pretty with kind of these shoegaze things, but actually turned them into practical songwriting concepts instead of just inspiration. They actually were able to meld these two things into a very unique way. This is where Placebo, I think, is very strong here in terms of talent, is songwriting, right? Very strong in terms of being inspirational and pushing forward kind of the whole scene of music and really pushing forward momentum. But here's where they kind of struggle, is in the brand category. When I say brand, this doesn't mean that they don't have an interesting thing. This kind of comes down into the actual execution and kind of a holistic thing. So I'll give you an example. Someone who just cares about brand would be like Kim Kardashian. She walks into Walmart, she goes, Metallica? I love that t-shirt company. They have amazing shirts. Like, people who don't get the music is not a factor, right? And the inspiration, the historical, so it's this stuff, right? How much clout is there? A band like Kiss was able to get a lot of mileage out of having really bright, definitive, and iconic design. Black Flag. Black Flag has basically a 0 here, right, in terms of songwriting quality. And I like Black Flag, but that's because I'm a fan. But their music is sloppy, right, because they have really good things a lot of times, but they just don't trim it down. They make it way too long-winded. And when I say they don't trim it down, I mean they have what could still be a 4-minute song, but they make it 7. You're like, guys, the really poppy version would be 2 minutes, and it'd be an Arctic Monkey song. The still more long-winded would be 4, but Black Flag will make it a 7-minute song, and you're like, guys, you're not doing yourself favors. So Black Flag is such a strong brand in terms of iconography, in terms of these things, the Misfits, right? Except the Misfits do have the songwriting, and they do have the inspiration, right? So the Misfits, but I think Black Flag's a great example of just brand. Just brand. Maybe Anthrax. Anthrax does not have the songwriting quality. Slayer as well, right? They don't have the consistency of that catalog of the songwriting quality. And I want to like Slayer. I want to like Anthrax. I want Anthrax to have more songs like Madhouse, but they don't. And then when they do have thrash metal songs, they're not good like Metallica or Megadeth's. They're slop, right? And so that's what you see a lot of people when say thrash metal. It's like, I'm a fan of thrash metal. It's different from I like Megadeth and Metallica. And you know what I mean? Because of that, because most of the genre is bad. So if we get back to Placebo here, you can see the historical impact seems like it might have been high in terms of inspiring a bunch of these people, and they might have a good impact. Oh, they also had stuff that sounded like Blur's self-titled album, which came out around a similar time, right? And that's kind of a reaction to what was probably happening in the U.S., right? Now integrating that in, also with some of the shoegaze stuff from in the U.K., yada yada yada. And so I'm not totally caught up on all of the historical impact, but there's another thing where it's like, I learned about Blur and Oasis and Pulp and all these different bands that were in Brit-Pop and kind of got a good sense of that movement as far as, 2020, which is not forever, but I mean 5 years now. And the only times I would hear about Placebo is when I'm in the car with my dad and he loves the song Good Morning and it always comes on shuffle on his Spotify. That's pretty much the extent before I started researching for this video and going through and listening. I had a feeling they were going to be a good band. They remind me of She Wants Revenge, right? In terms of, you're just like, that sounds awesome. That sounds good. It's medium to, it's in the rock zone, but still accessible to poppy people in terms of intensity. And then it's really, really, really catchy and really good and has an excellent vibe to it. And so that's what it reminded me of. But it's, once again, how much impact, how much depth is there into breaching broader culture. Maybe in England they had more depth, but I think a good example of someone who's able to still bridge the U.S. is, look at Gorillaz, Damon Albarn from Blur, but Oasis was able to penetrate the U.S. as well, right? It wasn't just suck there. You'd see a lot of the British bands that were more hard rock. They didn't have a problem bridging the U.S. gap. Not all of them had the easiest time, right? I mean, Black Sabbath, right? There's a great example, right? And I know you're like, oh, you're cherry picking. Anyways, but back to brand, when it comes to aesthetic designs, there's good stuff there, but it never really gets to the point where, I don't see people wearing Placebo t-shirts. I don't see people, even though their quality is there, I don't think they just were able to impact that much, though they might have done some inspiration. So I'd give this, a green. If you have green, red, yellow, I would say the songwriting is like top tier. The musicianship is medium good, right? It definitely, there's lots of things there that I see inspired probably the Killers and these people. But how big were they really? How much did they actually inspire people? But if you listen to it, there is a lot of stuff. If you're a musician, you would get inspired. So I do think they do good there. So green, yellow, green, and then here I'm going to go yellow, red, just because I don't think it penetrated it as much as they could have, and I think that probably waned in the cultural zeitgeist. You don't see a big resurgence, or I haven't. And if I haven't, then I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but I have seen a cultural resurgence through TikTok and things like this of mindless self-indulgence, of typo negative. There's lots of things where you're like, okay, these things were like, they're solid brand, but they come back and they get a new life and a second life and a third life, and Mother and All American Rejects is killing it right now. See, these are things that like would be indicative of green, or they were really big at the time and they've still been coasting off that. Like Arctic Monkeys, the last couple albums they've put out, The Car is just bad, right? It's just a bad album. It's not for fans of that style of music. It's really a testament of that's a test of, is someone a super fan? Are they just obsessed with the band, right? An album like that. But this is a little off topic for Placebo. But the whole point I bring up Arctic Monkeys in their latest album is, man, Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino is a little bit slower and it's not nearly as accessible. It's right in that for only fans range, right? Maybe between a 5 and a 7 in terms of catchiness out of 10, right? And so for me as a fan, I still like it. Now it's really far from their energy level and intensity level too. But it's in that zone, and I can get some mileage out of it as a fan, right? A lot of Queens of the Stone Age catalog is in that 5 to 7 in terms of catchiness, right? Clear examples when they don't do that and they actually hit like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 is 3s and 7s, and which is incredible. And I love Era Vulgaris from Queens of the Stone Age, which is their most kind of like aggressive and like, not catchy record. Maybe not least catchy. It's pretty catchy. But it's just very grating. It's very not written to be pop and accessible. But 3s and 7s, which is a song off that record, is their most accessible, their most hard-hitting, their best rock song. It proves why I would say Queens of the Stone Age, if they just made more songs like 3s and 7s. I don't mean they sound the same, but I mean in terms of that catchiness, in terms of that, putting it there, getting the production, dialing things in, and just blending these things together. That's an actually progressive rock song in terms of composition and production and things like that, right? That's where I go, man, I wish Queens of the Stone Age made more music like that so that I could listen to that instead of Metallica songs, which are great, but the Queens of the Stone Age have an even higher level, but they don't put out that music as much, right? And so what I was saying is with Arctic Monkeys, they've been putting out music that's outside of the energy level and the catchiness threshold that most of their fan base was built on, especially in England. They got a little bit of a pop from that in 2013 with, AM and all that stuff, right? But I mean, it's just they're coasting off of that because they had such a strong brand. And then there's other bands, like I was saying, Typo Negative, these types of things that are having a resurgence because of, their brand and things like that. Look at Creed or Nickelback. They were big. I think Nickelback, for example, were really big. So big that they got hated on, but they still had such a strong brand, they're able to continue. And now there's a resurgence, and people are like, no, Nickelback were always cool. And now it's like still, but they had that, right? You don't see that, I don't think, with Placebo, right? I don't see Placebo documentary on Netflix. Maybe I'm not looking, but that would be my read on it. And I do like them. So now we finally get to, are people going to consider them slop or not? Now, I think this is going to be interesting because when you have a band like this where either people listen to them or they don't, right? If it's not something that was really big, so maybe in Britain, how about this? In America, if people listen to them, they're going to actually listen to a lot of the catalog and actually have an educated opinion, right? But if you're just talking about people in Britain, you might see more like this. So people go, is the band catchy? Is the band not catchy? This is where you're able to rank an individual song, right? On the average catchiness, memorability, iconicness, etc., the average intensity over the course of the song, right? And I might have to go to the gym soon. But these things, this is where basically, over the course of a song, right? And so most people, they go, where's the band, right? And so I think they do the songs I remember, where are they about, right? What songs do they remember? The ones they like, right? So here are the ones that I liked, my top 10, right? And so you can see here I said controversy is going to be low. Their catalog is mostly good music. They're very good in terms of song, medium good in terms of musicianship, and the brand is okay, but wasn't super strong. Top song, my friend in need's a friend with weed, a friend in need, a better Placebo, and then Every You, Every Me, The Bitter End, Special K, Slave to the Wage was epic, You Don't Care About Us, Black Eyed, oh my god, Post Blue, yeah, that was great, Drag, and then Ashtray Heart. You can see almost all of it. I don't want to do decimal points, and originally I had some of these as like 6.5 and things like that, and some of these catchiness were like 7.5. You know, like this one was a 7.5. I don't think they really have any songs that are even a 7 in their top 10. And so this kind of tells me, and here's the thing too, they might have, like 20 songs that are all 8 out of 10s, but some of them are probably lower energy, and my preference is for higher energy. So even if a song is a 7.5, but it's a 6 in terms of energy instead of a 4, for me, my top 10 is going to put those songs there. So for someone who actually goes and listens to the band, maybe someone in Britain who heard a bunch of these songs, they might say, okay, to me, 8.3 in terms of catchiness and a 6.2 in terms of energy. This puts us exactly where I was kind of saying with She Wants Revenge, these things like that. Let's see, do I have a ruler to point with? Okay, so we have a 6 right here. Top. There we go. We have a 6 right here in terms of intensity, 6.2 I said. And then we come over to an 8.3. That's going to put us firmly in the rock zone. You're going to see we're going to be bordering around pop, punk, and indie, which is the other genres people would say they borrow elements from. Now, when the songs are lower in intensity but still good in quality, they're going to say they're indie, crossing over the slop line because they're still an 8, turn into indie pop, right? There's indie pop elements. People are going to say there's punk indie elements that turn into rock songs because they're catchy, right? Like the Strokes, for example, are kind of in this mix of indie and punk and rock. But then they get over to the rock zone because the songs are catchy. Likewise, you see that with other bands. You see that with Cage the Elephant. You see that with lots of these, bands that are in this 4 to 7 intensity range. I call that usually about upbeat. It tends to be called upbeat. That's what I have observed. Right? This tends to be stuff that's like sleepy or chill. Chill music is from 0 to 4 in terms of intensity. 7 to 11 is aggressive, right? Is high energy, right? This is intense music, this is upbeat music, and this is chill music. Chill, upbeat, and intense, right? Chill, upbeat, intense, yada, yada, yada. And then down here, you have hit quality music, stuff that can be cross energy level, no matter what energy level you like. If it's going to be here, it's hard to deny. If you say, basically, if it's in this zone, even if it's not your preference, you're still going to like it. Then you get back here, maybe between 4 and 7 or 5 and 7. And then if you're a fan of this energy level, maybe you'll like the stuff in this box. If you're a fan of this energy level, maybe you'll like the stuff in this box. Right? So when you get between 5 and 7, it then becomes people chop off wherever they like their preferences. It's pick and play, right? And then maybe after a 5, if it's not at least a 5 out of 10, this just turns into where everyone's going to call it garbage, right? So it kind of gets this thing where it's like everyone says it's good, maybe 1 and 3, right? And then here where it's just all bad, right? So it's almost like, what do people actually like say is slop? If it's below a 5 out of 10, it doesn't matter, it's getting called slop. And then if it's between a 7 and a 5, it's going to be, just the fans of that genre might say, it's not slop, it's punk, you know what I mean? Or it's not slop, it's indie, country, jazz, whatever, right? That's down here. I put a little disclaimer, jazz, blues, country, etc. Grunge is maybe between a 4 and a 7. It's just kind of upbeat, indie/punk range, right? But yeah, so Placebo, really good. And I think, well, here's the thing though. I think most people who actually go through and listen to Placebo and aren't from Britain or didn't hear it growing up, they probably actually, bonk, bonk. I'm playing around with the camera. I'm like, playing around with my ruler. I can't believe I didn't use my ruler before. Look at you. Look at you. What are you doing? Anyways, so people who actually are listening to this, they're not just going to be normies, probably. They're going to be people who actually went through and looked at their whole discography or listened through a bunch of albums. And so they're pretty much going to know their pop and or rock. So if you were a normie and you were in Britain where they got a lot of play, ostensibly, in the 90s, early 2000s, and that may have translated to local radio, for decades later when you're growing up in the car, yada, 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 right? Then you would call them a rock and or pop band because their catchiness is consistent. They're going to be over here, right? Pretty much mostly here. And then if you actually went through and listened to them like a nerd, you're also going to say they're really good. So that's my thought. Like, comment, subscribe. I will see you in the next video. That's my band Black Licorice at the end. Go check it out. You hear that audio? You better hear it. It's my song, Tell It To Me. Go check it out on Spotify and on Apple Music, etc. I'll see you in the next video. And also, who do you want to see next time? Also, what other topics do you want me to talk about? I'll see you then.
Let me save it, stop it, you're on